Montgomery Medical Center's private wing had never seen chaos like this. 18 of the world's most decorated physicians crowded into Suite 312, a luxury room designed for quiet recovery, not desperate rescue. White coats blurred under designer lighting that cost more than most annual salaries. Heart monitors screamed. For pumps hissed. A team from Johns Hopkins barked orders at specialists flown in from Tokyo, while Dr. Heinrich Voss from Geneva, the man who'd saved 3 European royals, wiped sweat from his forehead and whispered what no one wanted to hear: "We're losing him." Baby Ethan Montgomery, 6-month-old heir to a $60 billion pharmaceutical empire, was dying. And $100,000 a day in combined medical expertise couldn't tell his parents why. His tiny body had turned the texture of parchment paper, skin sunken, eyes hollow, fontanelle collapsed like a crater. Every genetic panel came back normal. Every scan showed nothing. Every treatment failed. And through the ground floor window, pressing her face against rain-streaked glass that had never been touched by someone like her, stood Maya, 16 years old, homeless for 3 years, wearing a donated jacket 2 sizes too large and shoes held together with duct tape and hope. She'd spent her whole life being invisible in this city, the girl who slept behind dumpsters, who noticed everything because no one ever noticed her. Right now, she was staring at baby Ethan through that window, at the sunken soft spot on his head, at the papery skin that wouldn't bounce back, at the desperate crying without tears. The signs every genius in that room had walked past 17 times without recognition. Maya's hands trembled. She knew what it was. The summer she turned 13, the summer that nearly killed her, had taught her to recognize dehydration before it became death. No textbook, no medical school, just survival. She'd learned it from keeping herself alive when her body shut down from heat stroke and no one came to help. She'd learned it from Tommy, who died under the bridge from this exact thing. She'd learned it from Sarah, who she'd saved by dragging her to a sprinkler. The doctors were preparing surgical equipment now. They were going to cut that baby open, searching for answers that weren't there. The answer was simple, brutal, and staring them in the face. Ethan Montgomery was dying of thirst. Maya looked at the window, then at the security guard making rounds, then at her own reflection in the glass. A ghost girl, invisible to everyone who mattered. She thought about what would happen if she was wrong, if she burst in screaming about water and they arrested her for trespassing. One more charge meant juvenile detention. It meant losing her shelter bed. It meant losing everything. Then she thought about what would happen if she was right and did nothing. If baby Ethan's face joined Tommy's face in her nightmares. If she spent the rest of her life knowing she let another person die from something as simple as dehydration because she was too afraid to be seen. Maya pulled her jacket tight, took a breath that burned her lungs, and ran. What would you risk to save a life that the world says isn't your business to save? If you're already feeling Maya's impossible choice, drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from. New York? London? Lagos? Let me know. And hit subscribe, because what this homeless girl does next will shock every doctor in that room, including the baby's own billionaire father. Don't miss it. Maya crouched behind the dumpster, her entire body screaming at her to stay hidden, to stay safe, to stay invisible the way she'd trained herself to be for 3 years. Her breath came in short gasps, fogging in the cold December air. She counted the risks like rosary beads, each one heavier than the last. Security would arrest her, doctors would dismiss her as crazy, police would charge her with trespassing. She was already on probation for sleeping in the hospital parking garage last winter. The night guard had found her huddled near the heating vents and filed a report instead of just looking the other way. One more charge meant juvenile detention. It meant losing her spot at the shelter on 5th Street, the one place that gave her a bed 3 nights a week. It meant losing everything she'd fought to keep. But baby Ethan's face kept flashing in her mind, overlapping with Tommy's face, Sarah's face, her own face in the mirror that terrible summer when she'd watched herself dying by degrees. Maya remembered what dehydration felt like. Not the gentle thirst you fix with a glass of water, but the violent kind. The confusion that made simple thoughts impossible. The panic when your body screamed for water, but your brain stopped working enough to find it. The way your tongue turned to leather and your skin felt like it was shrinking around your bones. A baby couldn't ask for help. A baby just suffered until someone noticed. And nobody was noticing. Through the window, Maya watched Dr. Sterling, the lead physician she'd overheard nurses talking about, the one from Johns Hopkins with the ego to match his credentials, snap on surgical gloves, and gesture toward equipment being wheeled into the suite. They were going to operate. They were going to cut into that baby, searching for answers that weren't hiding in his organs or his blood. The surgery would stress his already failing system, push his fragile body past the point of no return. Maya's decision crystallized with sudden, terrifying clarity. She'd rather go to jail for trying than live free, knowing she'd let a baby die. She remembered Tommy's last words, whispered in that space under the Route 9 bridge that smelled like mildew and despair. "It hurts, Maya. Everything hurts." She wouldn't hear those words echoing in her head for the rest of her life from another child. Not when she could do something about it. Maya stood, her legs shaking but steady enough. She moved from the dumpsters toward the hospital's east entrance, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She knew this building intimately, every service entrance, every blind spot in camera coverage, every shift change timing. Security rotation happened at 7 p.m. There was a 12-minute gap when the east entrance was monitored only by cameras, not guards. She'd used this window dozens of times to access bathrooms and water fountains. But she'd never gone to the private wing, never risked the third floor where wealthy patients paid $5,000 per night for the privilege of suffering in luxury. Maya slipped through the service entrance, moving like smoke through corridors she'd memorized, past the cafeteria where she'd stolen food when the lunch rush provided cover, past the chapel where she'd slept on cold nights, curled in the back pew where shadows hid her from security cameras. Her worn sneakers made no sound on polished floors that cost more to install than she'd seen in her lifetime, toward the elevator that would take her to the third floor, toward baby Ethan, toward either her salvation or her destruction. The third floor of Montgomery Medical Center was a different world entirely. Carpeted hallways muffled every sound. Original artwork hung on walls painted in soothing neutrals. The silence was broken only by the soft beeping of distant monitors and the hushed voices of nurses who moved like ghosts through private suites where suffering came with a price tag. Maya found Suite 312 at the end of the East Corridor. The placard beside the door read, "Montgomery, private care, no unauthorized entry." Through the rectangular window, she could see them all, 18 doctors in a semicircle around an incubator that looked more like a spaceship than medical equipment. Richard Montgomery paced near the window, his expensive suit rumpled, his normally commanding presence reduced to helpless desperation. His wife Catherine was collapsed in a chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. A security guard stood posted outside, thick-necked and alert, scrolling through his phone with the bored efficiency of someone who'd stood watch for hours. Maya knew she had one chance. Distraction wouldn't work. There was nowhere to hide up here. Stealth wouldn't work. The guard was 3 feet from the door. Only desperation worked. Only the truth screamed loud enough that someone would have to listen. She walked directly toward the door, no hesitation, moving with the false confidence she'd learned from surviving on streets where predators could smell fear like blood and water. The guard's head snapped up. "Hey, stop right there. This is a restricted." Maya didn't stop. She ran, straight at the door, hitting it with both palms, the sound echoing through the quiet hallway like a gunshot. "The baby needs water. He's dehydrated. Look at his fontanelle." Her voice cracked with urgency, with 3 years of being ignored, with Tommy's death and Sarah's near death and her own survival. The guard grabbed her, his arms like steel bands crushing her chest, lifting her off her feet. "Security to third floor, East Wing. We have an intruder." Inside the room, 18 faces turned toward the window, toward the homeless girl being restrained, still screaming about water. Dr. Sterling stormed to the door, his face red with fury and exhaustion. Security, remove her immediately. We're trying to save a child's life here. Maya fought against the guard's grip, her sneakers kicking air. That's what I'm trying to do. Check his skin, Turger. Press his skin and watch how long it takes to bounce back. Look at his fontanelle. It's sunken because he's severely dehydrated. Richard Montgomery approached the door, his expression caught between rage and confusion. Who is this girl? How did she get in here? Catherine Montgomery's voice cut through, broken with grief. Please, just get her out. We can't handle this right now. But Dr. Chun, the youngest physician in the room, a woman in her early 30s with kind eyes that hadn't yet learned to stop seeing patients as people, stepped closer to the door. She was the only one who'd worked in rural clinics before joining Montgomery's elite team, the only one who'd treated patients who couldn't afford the genetic panels and CT scans. Wait, Dr. Chun said slowly, her voice cutting through the chaos. What did she say about the fontanelle? Silence fell over Suite 312 like a hell breath. Dr. Chun moved to baby Ethan's incubator, placed her fingers gently on his soft spot, that vulnerable opening in his skull where bone hadn't yet fused. Her face changed in real time. Shock, then recognition, then horror. Oh my God, she whispered. It's sunken. Significantly sunken. She pinched the baby's skin on his tiny arm. It tinted, stayed tinted, took 3 full seconds to flatten back down. Skin turgor is severely decreased. Dr. Chin's voice rose with urgency. We need to check serum sodium, electrolyte panel now. Dr. Sterling moved closer, disbelief written across his face. That's impossible. He's on premium formula, round-the-clock feeding schedule. Maya, still held by security, gasped out. Check what he's actually getting. Check the formula. Someone's doing something wrong. Richard Montgomery's voice cut through the room like a blade. Let her in. The guard released her. Maya stumbled into Suite 312, suddenly hyper-aware of how she must look. Dirty jacket, jeans with holes that weren't fashionable, hair that hadn't seen shampoo in 4 days. Her hands were clean enough from the rain, but they carried the evidence of her life. Chapped knuckles, dirt under her fingernails, calluses from carrying bags of recyclables. The doctor stepped back instinctively. She was contamination in their sterile space, a violation of every protocol they'd been trained to follow. But Maya moved directly to the incubator, to baby Ethan who was whimpering without tears, that devastating sound of a body too dehydrated to cry properly. Up close, he looked worse than she'd feared. His lips were cracked and pale, his eyes sunken so deep they looked like bruises. I need to get him to water, Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. Not 4. That'll take too long. His skin needs cooling, his mouth needs moisture, his body needs immediate rehydration. Dr. Sterling moved to block her. You can't just put a critically ill infant under a faucet. Maya met his eyes. Watch me. She lifted Ethan from the incubator. So light, so terrifyingly fragile, his small body burning with fever that radiated through her jacket. He was the weight of a bag of groceries, this heir to billions. The same weight Tommy had been near the end. Maya carried him to the suite's private bathroom, the doctors following in a wave of white coats and shouted protests. But Richard Montgomery blocked the doorway with his body, his voice rough with desperation. Let her try. Nothing else has worked. Maya turned on the tap, testing the water temperature with her elbow the way she'd seen mothers do in public restrooms. Lukewarm, not cold enough to shock his system. She positioned Ethan carefully so water ran over his scalp, down his back, soaking his hospital gown. With her free hand, she cupped water to his cracked lips, letting drops fall into his mouth. This is how I saved myself, she explained quietly, her voice competing with the running water. Summer 3 years ago, I collapsed from heat stroke. No money for a hospital, no one to help. I crawled to a construction site sprinkler and let water soak into my skin, dripped it on my tongue until I could swallow again. Ethan's whimpering changed pitch. His mouth opened, tongue reaching instinctively for the water like a flower turning towards sun. Maya gave him more, tiny amounts, letting his body remember what it had been screaming for. His small fingers curled against her arm. The room watched in stunned silence. Dr. Chen had pulled up Ethan's latest labs on her tablet, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. Serum sodium is 158. That's severe hypernatremic dehydration. Her voice carried disbelief and dawning horror. But how? The feeding logs show consistent formula intake. The suite door burst open. A nurse, breathless and wide-eyed. "Dr. Sterling, we found something." Maria, the nanny, was just stopped trying to leave the building. Security searched her bag. There are bottles of pure formula concentrate and empty water bottles. She's been diluting the feeds. Richard Montgomery's face drained of color, his expression shifting from confusion to betrayal. "Maria? She's been with us for 5 years. She was stealing," Dr. Chen finished grimly. "Diluting the formula, pocketing the difference, probably replacing it with water to maintain volume. The baby was getting maybe 40% of the nutrition he needed." In Maya's arms, baby Ethan's skin began to pink up, slowly at first, then more noticeably as his body absorbed what it had been dying for. His fontanelle, that sunken crater, slowly, visibly started to rise as hydration returned to his tissues. The change that millions in medical technology couldn't produce was happening with simple water and a homeless girl's desperate knowledge. Within 30 minutes, baby Ethan's vital signs began to stabilize. The heart monitor that had been screaming warnings now beeped in steady rhythm. His oxygen saturation climbed from dangerous lows into normal ranges. Color, real, healthy color, spread across his skin like sunrise breaking through clouds. Dr. Chun started 4 fluids, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Properly balanced electrolyte solution now that they knew the diagnosis, now that a homeless teenager had given them the answer they'd missed. The other physicians stood in various states of shock and shame, their expensive educations suddenly feeling inadequate. Maya sat in the corner of the suite, still soaked from the sink, water dripping from her jacket onto the carpet that probably cost more than most cars. Her arms ached from holding Ethan, her heart still hammered with adrenaline, and she was starting to realize that she'd just broken into a private medical suite and put her hands on a billionaire's baby. Dr. Sterling approached slowly, his earlier fury replaced by something that might have been humility. "How did you know?" His voice was quiet, stripped of its earlier authority. Maya looked up at him, this man from Johns Hopkins with his prestigious credentials and his inability to see what was right in front of him. "I've seen it before. In myself. In friends who didn't make it." Her voice was steady, matter of fact. "When you live on the streets, you learn to read bodies because nobody's coming to save you. You save yourself or you die. Dehydration looks the same whether you're sleeping under a bridge or in a mansion." Catherine Montgomery crossed the room and did something Maya never expected. She knelt before her, tears streaming down her face, her designer dress pooling on the floor. "You gave me back my son." Her voice broke on every word. "How can we ever?" She couldn't finish the sentence, overcome by the kind of gratitude that has no adequate words. Maya expected money, maybe a reward check, a handshake, a thank you before security escorted her out now that her usefulness was done. That's how the world worked when you were invisible. You were only valuable in the moment you could be used. Instead, Richard Montgomery pulled up a chair, an expensive leather chair that probably cost more than Maya had earned in 3 years of collecting recyclables, and sat eye level with her. Not standing over her, not looking down. Eye level, like she was a person who mattered. "Tell me about yourself," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Your name, your story, everything." So Maya told them. About foster care and aging out of the system at 13 when her last placement family moved to Oregon and the paperwork got too complicated. About 3 years living on the streets, learning survival education from necessity rather than textbooks. About the summer she nearly died, about Tommy who did die, about Sarah and old Joe and all the invisible people who'd taught her to see what others missed. About choosing Montgomery Medical Center as her territory because hospitals meant bathrooms and water fountains and warmth in winter. Richard listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from shock to fury to something that looked like shame. When Maya finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was trying to find the right words. "I built a pharmaceutical empire treating diseases," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "My company develops drugs that cost thousands of dollars per dose. We hold patents on treatments for rare genetic disorders. I've been interviewed in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal about innovation in medicine." He paused, looking at his son. Healthy now, sleeping peacefully in the incubator. "But I couldn't see basic dehydration in my own son. You know why? Because I was looking for expensive problems with expensive solutions. I was so focused on finding something rare, something worthy of all this expertise," he gestured to the 18 doctors still standing in his suite, "that I couldn't see the simple, brutal truth right in front of me." He looked at his wife, some unspoken communication passing between them, then back to Maya. "How would you like to never sleep outside again?" Maya's breath caught in her throat. "What?" Catherine moved closer, taking Maya's hand. This wealthy woman in her designer clothes holding the hand of a homeless girl who hadn't seen soap in days. "We'd like to offer you a home. With us. If you'll have us." Her voice was steady now, certain. Maya stared, her brain unable to process the words. Adoption. Family. Safety. Belmanos. Things she'd stopped letting herself want because wanting hurt too much when you knew you'd never have them. I'm not." She couldn't form coherent sentences. "You saved our son's life," Richard said simply. "But more than that, you showed us what we'd become. How blind we'd been. You don't owe us anything, Maya, but we'd like the chance to give you what you gave us. A future." 6 months later, Maya stood in a courtroom wearing clothes that actually fit, her hair clean and styled, her hands steady as she placed them on the witness stand Bible. She looked different, healthy, rested, no longer carrying the gaunt desperation of someone who didn't know where her next meal would come from. But her eyes were the same, sharp, observant, missing nothing. The investigation had moved fast once Maria, the nanny, had been arrested. 7 other wealthy families had come forward, their infants suffering from mysterious illnesses that doctors couldn't explain. All of them had used Elite Nannies Incorporated, the same agency that prioritized appearance and impeccable references over actual background checks. All of them had hired caregivers who saw children not as lives to protect, but as opportunities to exploit. Maria had been diluting Ethan's formula to 40%, selling the expensive organic concentrate online and pocketing thousands of dollars to feed her gambling addiction. The other nannies had variations on the same scheme, some stealing medication, some skimming from household accounts, all of them hiding behind the assumption that wealth meant safety. Maya's testimony was the one the press couldn't stop quoting. "I was invisible because I was homeless. Baby Ethan was invisible because everyone assumed money meant he was safe. But invisibility kills, whether you're on the streets or in a mansion. No one saw me because I had nothing. No one saw Ethan suffering because he had everything. I'm here to make sure no one stays invisible again." The judge ruled in favor of the Montgomery family's lawsuit. The settlement, $47 million from Elite Nannies Incorporated and their insurance carriers, would fund the Montgomery Foundation for homeless youth medical training. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like moths to flame, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Richard Montgomery stood at the podium with Maya beside him, not behind him, beside him, and announced that she would serve as the foundation's youngest board member. Catherine stood slightly apart, holding baby Ethan, now 1 year old, healthy and thriving, his eyes bright with curiosity. He'd been watching Maya throughout the announcement, and suddenly he squirmed in his mother's arms, reaching toward her. "Maya." His voice was clear, certain, his first real word beyond mama and dada. The crowd went silent. Even the reporters stopped shouting questions. Maya knelt to his level, her eyes bright with tears she didn't bother hiding. "That's right, little man. I'm Maya." She held out her arms, and Catherine passed Ethan to her. The transfer gentle and natural, like they'd done it 1,000 times before. "And I'm not going anywhere." 1 year later, Maya stood on stage at the Montgomery Foundation for Homeless Youth Medical Training Center, 17 years old, and impossibly different from the girl who'd pressed her face against Rain Street glass 2 years ago. The auditorium was packed with former homeless youth, kids who'd learned to survive on the edges, who'd developed the same sharp observational skills Maya had, who knew how to read bodies because their own survival had depended on it. "The streets taught me to see what others miss," Maya told the crowd, her voice steady and strong. "I learned to spot dehydration, heat stroke, hypothermia, infection, not from textbooks but from keeping myself and my friend alive. That knowledge saved baby Ethan's life. Now we're teaching that vision to everyone who needs it." The center offered free medical training to homeless youth and former foster kids, basic assessment skills, survival medicine, how to recognize emergencies that the wealthy and educated often missed because they were looking for complex answers to simple problems. Already, 3 lives have been saved by graduates of the program. 3 invisible people who might have died if someone hadn't learned to see them. As Maya finished her speech, baby Ethan, now a toddler, walking steadily, broke free from Catherine's hand and toddled toward the stage, his arms outstretched. The crowd laughed as Maya knelt and lifted him, settling him on her hip with the practiced ease of a big sister. A photographer captured the moment. Maya and Ethan, both smiling, surrounded by the Foundation's new medical training equipment and the faces of youth who'd been invisible until someone decided to see them. The next day's newspaper ran the photo above the fold. The caption read, "From invisible to invaluable, how a homeless teen exposed the blind spots of wealth." But Maya's favorite response came from Tommy's memorial under the Route 9 bridge, where someone had added new words to the makeshift marker. "Not forgotten. Never again." Maya, she kept her promise. If this story moved you, if Maya's journey from the dumpsters to a family reminded you that one person can change everything, I need you to do 2 things. First, subscribe right now, because there are more stories like this, more invisible people doing impossible things, and you won't want to miss them. Second, drop a comment telling me your favorite part of Maya's story. Was it when she ran toward the hospital despite the risks? The moment she put Ethan under the water? When Montgomerys offered her a home? Or that final courtroom testimony? Tell me what hit you hardest. Your comments fuel these stories, and I read every single one. Thank you for being here. Thank you for seeing Maya the way she deserved to be seen all along.